Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge show. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, who's 22 minutes late today. The little the Space Turbine Mac Pro, which has been serving so faithfully for so many years now, 3 years, 4 years, I guess, determined that it needed to be rebooted, and there was no other way around it. And I remember in the past, these things used to make me extremely violently angry and filled me with a terrible, terrible rage. But I think I've gotten through that somehow, not over it, just kind of through it. I've just put my head through the wall. Actually, I actually did. And now it's just, well, okay, that's the way it goes, so there we are. In any event, here we are with the Stratosphere Lounge Show, episode number 161, hooray! And once again, I'm going to have to stay out of 3-hour territory. In fact, I'm going to have to stay out of 2-hour territory, but we will have some fun and take questions and do all that groovy stuff. So once again, here we are. Hey, everybody who's saying hi. And been doing all kinds of fun things. Probably shouldn't show you this, but I'm going to anyway. It's going to take a second. Yeah, I was working like a crazy man. And I really like it, and it's really good. But it is, it's a pretty busy schedule for old Bill. We have been doing a little bit of fooling around in a manly sort of way, and not in a gay way at all, with our friend Matt Lloyd and Foghorn, Viper Check 6. I've been playing a little Star Citizen in formation. I've been finally getting that together, figuring out how we want to do it, what we want to do, and if you understand the concept, the artistic concept of a work in progress, then I will show you this next image, and if you don't, then I won't. I'll just take that as a yes. So this is a work in progress. Let me just get the audio up there. As you know, it's a computer. Oh, come on now. It's a Star Citizen is a game where it's based on people out in space and spaceships and all the rest of that stuff. Is that going to do it? Here's something I just put together a couple days ago, and this is not finished. Let's see if it works. Hey now. Yeah, just for giggles, kind of fun, and we just slapped it together out of motorcycle gear and so on. The whole wetsuit thing is really much better. This is a little more clogged up than I would like, but it's still pretty cool. And don't you zoom in on that, because it's all about the texture, I don't think so. No, I don't. That's okay. So it's basically all about the texture, and the wetsuits are working well. One thing I did find is that wearing a 3mm wetsuit in August in California actually keeps you quite warm. In fact, it keeps you extremely warm. Natasha will tell you, if I kept it on another minute or two, I would have fainted, and you sweat a lot as well. Actually, you know what? I'm just in a stupid mood tonight. I'm going to show you one other thing. This one's actually taken a little bit earlier, but I think it's probably a little more in line with what we're talking about here. Which one do we want? Hang on now, kids. Everybody just be patient. Don't make me turn this car around. So be careful what I reveal and don't reveal. And the problem is the face was all smashed up in the helmet, but nevertheless, I guess. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so hang on, I'll do one more for you. And as I say, this one was taken a little while ago. About a week ago, and I'm still putting the whole thing together, so you'll get the general idea, and then we'll get off of Star Citizen, I promise. Okay, no, you want to do that? You want to come up here? How about up here? You want to come up here? How about if you come up here? That would be, oh, there you go. All right, here we go. This was taken about 2 weeks ago. And despite the lighting and so on, that's looking a little better. There's still all kinds of things getting together that have to work. I'm wearing a balaclava under my helmet there, which is for pressurization integrity, needless to say. However, it scrunches my face into an area about the size of a quarter and leaves me looking a little bit scrunched up. And the black visor looks kind of bad, cool on the other one. So, yeah, that's it. So that's some of the things I've been doing with my tremendous extra free time. Maybe next week I'll show you a video that Foghorn recorded of Matt Lloyd and me and Foghorn in the same vehicles in tight formation whizzing over the deck of the space station. I know no one's seen that before. Anyway, for those of you, this is the last I'll say about it, I honestly promise. Those of you who have written about Star Citizen, I have still not replied to those emails, but I am about to do so, if not this evening, then tomorrow. Now, I know everything happens in bill time, and bill promises need to be taken, you know, like they're coming from Bill. But with that said, the last 2 months there's just been so many choices and so many ways to do what we need to do. And one of the latest problems that we had to solve was the fact that if you, even though the game looks terrific, if you composite live actors into the game engine, it can look kind of jarring. So we're going to shoot a test. We're just going to do a 4 or 5 minute first episode, and then we'll see if we can find some funding to move on with that. But in any event, I think it looks really cool and certainly is fun to do. So let's see. Now we are looking for the questions, which I have not seen yet, needless to say. It's been a busy day here at BillWhittle.com. So let's go to our Facebook page. Silent Gloves, the answer is yes, especially in sound design, not just in music. All right, so here we go. And I know there's a lot of you out there, a lot of talent that I haven't contacted. And if there are any Unreal 4 level designers out there, or Unreal 4 experts, that'd be even better. All right, so Stratosphere Lounge questions, here they come. For episode number 161, let me move this someplace where I can see it. I'm strangely calm about all this stuff today. I don't know, maybe just growing up a little bit. That happens sometimes if you're not careful. All right, here we go. So looks like top ranked question goes to Stephen Darrow. Yeah. Steve Darrow asks, most of us revere Thomas Sowell as the greatest public intellectual and philosopher of the last 40 years. He took that mantle from Milton Friedman, who carried the torch for 30 years. Dr. Sowell turned 87 this year. Who do you think is in line to become that great public intellectual for the next 40 years? That's an excellent question. I do know for a certain fact it's not going to be yours truly, because both of those guys have 40 IQ points on me. And they think full-time, and I mostly just, talk. With that said, I think there's an interesting answer to this. And the answer, Steve, is that it doesn't have to be anybody. And that's the beauty of this philosophy. That's why I like it so much. It doesn't require you to be a theorist. I've seen what happens when you put intellectuals and theorists in charge of things. I've seen what happens when the Zenobites, are arguing with the Trotskyists and all the rest of it. And it's a bloody, horrible nightmare. So the entire reason I like conservatism so much as a philosophy is it's simple, it's tried and true, and it works. So, yes, as Eric Blake says, the smartest man in America may be forced to retire just because of biology finally catching up to that brain of his. But it's not rocket science. Or I suppose I should say it's not brain surgery. In any event, it's not rocket surgery. Eric suggested Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro might be a very good choice for that. I find that Ben Shapiro is more effective on political issues than I think on the philosophical issues, which is not to say for a moment that he doesn't understand them, but the guy's a bulldog, and And there he goes. Dave Big Booty says, love of theory is the root of all evil. Amen to that. Brother, never heard that before, but that's absolutely true. But this is the entire point, right? There's nothing about this philosophy that requires a PhD or a big intellect. Now, I know the left will say, ha, 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 see how stupid they are, but there's an expression I'm trying to coin desperately, and that is, any idiot can make things complicated. It takes a genius to make something simple. And that's the beauty of what we call conservatism. It's just simple. You can't spend more money than you make over time. You can borrow some, but you can't just continue to print money to pay off a debt because the currency will collapse. There are good people and bad people in the world. I'm perfectly willing to admit that many, if not most of the bad people, if not all of the bad people, turned into bad people because they were raised by other bad people, but that doesn't negate the fact that there are bad people out there who are predators. They're human predators, and they need to be treated as such. It'd be nice if it wasn't true, but it is true. By the way, it's strange. I was looking a little bit into. I did quite a bit of reading 2 weeks ago on early man and his expansion out of Africa and so on, and it looks like there were two waves of migration. And the first wave went hundreds of thousands of years before the second, and they developed into the Neanderthals. But the second wave came much later, and apparently numerous times humans had tried to get out of Africa and had been stopped, apparently by the Neanderthals or Java man in the East. So finally, using the latest in the genetic toolbox, they think that a band left Africa and that there may have been anywhere from 150 to about 450 people in that band, from which all of the non-African tree of descent comes from. And that must have been a hell of an adventure. So since that time, which has been quite a while ago, we have had a fair amount of trial and error experience. And these millennia of trial and error have taught us certain things, and some of those things are the things I mentioned. Sometimes there are bad people out there and they want to hurt you. And some people like hurting you. And those people have to be stopped, and they can't be stopped by kind words. It'd be nice if it were true, but it's not, so it isn't. They have to be stopped with violent force, and that has to be administered by people who are capable of administering violent force without being violent and cruel themselves. It's a tough trick. That requires parenting and discipline and guidance and all the rest of it. That's basically how things work. It also is true that for all of human history, you'd think it was the smartest people were in charge. It's certainly not true. They're certainly the people that became great emperors, the beginning of dynasties, guys like, Genghis Khan and Caesar, Alexander, and all the rest. They were breakout geniuses, but the quality to maintain rule over humans throughout history has been cruelty and ruthlessness. The willingness to do things that other people are not willing to do. The people who have basically been the administrators and the mainstays of all of the dictatorships and everything that has taken place in social organizations since we stopped being hunter-gatherers. By the way, hunter-gatherer societies are very egalitarian. They have to be because nobody owns anything, and the reason they don't own anything is because they're moving all the time. They literally own what they carry, and that's about it. So it is a very egalitarian society, and everybody's more or less equal in a hunter-gatherer society, but the problem is everybody is stone dirt poor. And I don't mean just not having Cadillacs either. I mean, they're fighting all the time, and they're one day away from starvation. So it's not like any of this stuff is new, and it's not like it's a theory that Thomas Sowell had, and it's not like Milton Friedman came up with this weird mathematical formula that has to be, translated and expounded upon in the way that Marx did, for example. It's pretty simple stuff, really. And primary among the things that people do not understand that gets clearer to me every day is not just how capitalism and freedom and republics work, but why they work. And The why, I think, is that it requires, the whole act of civilization required people to become less aggressive. There's pretty good compelling evidence that that one of the mutations that had to happen because there were hunter-gatherer societies for millennia, tens of thousands of years. Suddenly, people settled down in one spot, and people are speculating that it was a mutation that basically made humans considerably less fierce. You have to be less fierce to be in a civilization where you're up against other people and other people tell you what to do. That fundamental, original group out of Africa's fierceness, which was required to survive, had to eventually go away because you can't have cities when everybody's, not going to take orders from anybody else. Some people maintain a sense of ruthlessness, and because they're ruthless, they're willing to do things, as I say, that other people find repulsive or just too risky for them, and those people are the ones who have dominated society until the United States of America came along. And what I've learned about the United States of America, I spent the first half of my career, or 2/3 of my career, understanding how it works, and the last third or so understanding why it works. And the more I think about it, the more I come back to things that Friedman talked about and Thomas Sowell has talked about and Prager has talked about and all the rest. And I was wrong about this when I started. You have to have the right raw material, and the raw material consists of virtue. Hard work, well, that is a virtue, but virtue. You have to start from a place of fundamental decency, and that fundamental decency historically has been baked into the culture through religion. And the thing about Christianity is, with an internal conscience rather than an external judge, the idea that your conscience lives inside you, that means that you have to become virtuous to the best of your ability simply because it's what's required of your philosophy. It's not like, well, if nobody's watching, I can get away with it. It's not like that. And if you're not a virtuous people, if you're not a virtuous population, then you can't have a republic, because the entire idea of a republic is leaving people alone. And when you leave people alone, they can do amazing things. When you allow them to cooperate voluntarily but don't force them to cooperate, they'll go to the moon, by golly. But you can't have violent, fierce people living together without virtue. And not only is virtue not being taught today, but virtue, or instilled is a better word, I guess, but it's actively being mocked and derided, and the opposite of virtue is being promoted at a very high rate. And the consequences of this to the fabric of this society will not be pleasant. I'm sure Thomas Sowell can see that, and so could Friedman, and so can anybody. And that's what I like about this philosophy. Anybody can pretty much pick it up. Okay, as usual, Facebook has arranged the comments in a random order in terms of, it says top comments, but you know what? It's not the top comments. It says it's the most relevant comments. How it does that, I don't know. But the second one has 3 votes, so I'm going to just go down and try and find one with bigger numbers. There's an 11, there's an 8. So here we go with the number 11 from Steve Darrow. Not a coincidence. But the numbers are the numbers. Steve writes, again, I watched your interviews with Dave Rubin and loved them. At one point you mentioned that the two of you could each bring 10 followers, and the 22 of us could hammer out a platform that 85% of the country could agree on. 3 questions. Number 1, let's widen the fold a bit and assume that you can pick any 10 people living today. Who would you select as your 10? Number 2, will you do this as a speakeasy show? Number 3, can I be the one manning the dry erase board in the background? Kind comments, all of them. But the point is, Steve, that I think the specific point is that you don't have to pick them. In fact, I don't want to pick them. If I pick them, there'd be selection bias in there. And when I said 10 of our followers and 10 of Dave's followers, plus Dave Rubin and me, I basically meant 10 general people who call themselves liberals and 10 people who generally call themselves conservatives, and a lot of people here are in the middle. A lot of Dave's audience is in the middle because he's a rational guy, and I certainly try to be. And so that's the beauty of it. It doesn't require, it's kind of related to the first question, also asked by Stephen Darrow. That's a remarkable coincidence, actually. It doesn't require geniuses. It doesn't require experts. It doesn't require any kind of selection. I think we could just take random 10 conservatives and random 10 Republicans, 10 people who voted Republican, and 10 people who voted Democrat. And if Dave Rubin and I were leading the conversation simply because we both respect each other's ability to reason, although we're coming from different places, and that ability to respect the other person's reason is so rare in our society now that it's practically an engraved invitation to have a serious discussion. If we were able to start the discussion and keep it civil and make it clear that we're not going to stick to old labels and we can come out of our trenches and get over the I could never vote for a Republican and all Democrats are traitors and all the rest of it, then we would find, I think, that what just about everybody in the country wants is pretty much the same thing. And once you got to the place where you realized that the people who you had thought were adversaries really want the same things that you want, then it becomes a question of what's the best way to do it. And that's a case where rational, reasonable discussion can provide some answers. And many of these answers, if not most of the answers, are what I would call conservative answers, however, with the caveat that I have spoken to many conservatives about the implementation of many of these policies, and their attitude towards the implementation has been, I don't want to say cruel exactly or heartless, but it has assumed that everybody is as capable of willful action on their own as that individual happened to be. And that's where the progressives come in and are handy. You know, it really is kind of a Spock McCoy kind of a thing. With Kirk making the decisions, you can have solutions that are. If you sit down and identify the need, and look, and when I say the need's actually pretty simple. Honestly, I'd like to live in a safe society where people are not being gunned down in the streets. I'd like to live in a place where I have the ability to live my life as I want to. I'd like to live in a place where there are no starving people on the streets, and to the degree that that's progressive to make sure that nobody's starving in this country. I think we're all probably progressives. So I think I'd like to have a defense that is not only adequate but intimidating and overwhelming, because that's the easiest. And when you get right down to it, the most expensive military in the world is actually the cheapest way to live your life, because the alternative is the destruction of pretty much everything. So Merlin Mega says that not the social justice warriors and the socialists, they're not sane, but I disagree. I think they are completely sane. I think that first of all, I think that they've been absolutely, forget about brainwashed, that term is too aggressive. They've been selected. All of their information, all of their stories, all of their emotional connections, all of their heuristics basically have been predetermined for them. And if you have to build a reality out of the things that they've heard, there's no other rational conclusion to come to. So the hard part of this is deconstructing people's heuristic structure, deconstructing their perception of the world based on their emotional response to things. And I think progressives do that more than conservatives, but we do it too. And I found myself many times having a visceral reaction to something and then realizing, well, it actually does make sense. So I think combining these two things, you could in fact put together a political party and a platform that would appeal to 85% of the American population. And I'm going to split 10% off for the progressives and 5% for the conservatives, just as a rule of, just an estimation of people who will say that this is not progressive enough or this is not conservative enough. But when that's basically out of the way, I think you'd be amazed at how much people are in agreement about things. They disagree about how to get there. But again, that's where our friend history can help us quite a lot. We have data. We have evidence. We've seen what happens when we do some things. We've seen what happens when we do some different things. And people on the left can be convinced that the methods are wrong, but first they have to be convinced that our motives are genuine and decent and compassionate and humanitarian. That's the trick. The trick for us is we have to recognize that there are people who are in many ways simply incapacitated, and using drug addicts as an example, I've heard many people on the right basically say it's a self-control problem, it's a willpower problem. Just stop doing it and you'll stop doing it. And while I certainly understand that perspective, I would respectfully reply that that's someone who doesn't have an addiction problem speaking. So once you lay all this stuff out on the table, you can, in fact, get to a big tent. And to the degree that there'd be disagreement on most of these issues, we could agree to disagree or take the fight somewhere else, out of politics. But it's kind of disturbing and kind of sad, and maybe that's something that Dave and I should get together and record, because I think it would really be a lot of fun. And I think I'd learn a lot, and I like learning things. I like having my opinion changed by people who are capable of doing it with good arguments and reason, experience that I haven't had, or viewpoints I haven't considered before, and so on. All right, moving on to number 8, the mysterious and deadly Matthew Lloyd wants to know. It's been said that the only thing worse than facing your enemy is meeting your hero, because it's virtually certain that they cannot live up to your expectations. Have you ever had that experience? How did it impact you? If the preceding premise is true, what is the role of heroes? Well, by happy coincidence, Matt, I was up in Idaho a couple weeks ago, and I was asked to speak at a dinner for Republicans in Coeur d'Alene. And I was up there for the 5th or 6th time visiting my hero, one of the people I've admired since I can remember being old enough to look at airplanes, and that's Burt Rutan. I stayed at his house, and so did Natasha. And I've been up there many times with him. And every time I've had a chance to do a speaking event up there, Burt has been in the audience. I've been in the audience for a couple of his. I was in his audience at the Oshkosh Air Show 2 years ago, and he pulled me up on stage and had me say something, which was very nice of him. But Burt Rutan is my hero, and let me just I'll see if I can repeat this verbatim, because this is what I said just before I got into the speech. This is really what I said, believe it or not, because it's going to almost sound exactly like your question word for word. But I said, ladies and gentlemen, before we get started tonight, I just want to say one thing. You know, it's extremely rare for anyone to have the opportunity to actually meet one of their heroes. And it's even more rare for you to be able to have spent enough time with one of your heroes, like Burt Rutan is for me, and get to know them really well. And even more scarce than that is meeting a hero, spending time with a hero, and then realizing after knowing them well that you are not disappointed in them once you get to know their actual character. And Burt, I just want to say, you know, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And Burt just kicked his head back and laughed, and everybody else laughed, and people laughed because they knew what I was saying. And so the answer is, it is indeed possible. It's possible to meet heroes. I've had a chance to become friends with people like Gary Sinise and John Voight and a number of other people, and they've always been as good as or better than I hoped that they would be. Again, I don't know if that is a conservative liberal thing. I have heard anecdotally that people like, this is probably not a fair criticism. I was going to say people like Bill Maher and other people on the left, when they do a speaking event, the second it's over, they're helicoptered out of there because they don't have to mix with the hoi polloi. But I understand that that's probably true for guys like Mark Stein and Rush Limbaugh as well. I don't see Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck work in the room afterwards. I do. I do because it's my favorite part of the night for a number of reasons. Meeting people is tremendous. This is where I learned everything I learned, basically. I always learn something. Almost always meet somebody who's either from the Stratosphere Lounge or somebody goes back to the Eject days or member or something like that. and it's the high point of my night and the high point of my trip. So, yeah. So the answer to your question is yes, I have met a hero, and I have gotten to know a hero, and I have not only not been disappointed in my hero, but I've been impressed. Now, there are little things, little idiosyncrasies. And by the way, when I told Bert Rutan this many visits previously, he said, I feel the same way about you, and that was enough to just, you could knock me over with a feather after that. What's the role of heroes? Sorry about the vision. Bone Canoe 86, who I pronounced correctly this time, says, what do you think about the fact that there's a number of young people who see you as their hero? And my first response is to say, boy, we're getting pretty scarce in the hero department out there if I'm somebody's hero. And I mean this sincerely. I know it sounds like false modesty, but I'm very serious. We had grown up on actual heroes, you know. If I had to pick one person who was alive at the same time as me who I would like to have met and didn't, it would have been Neil Armstrong by a wide margin, I think. And Neil Armstrong was a great hero of mine. But there are no Neil Armstrongs anymore that I'm aware of. I've met some superb test pilots, and I've met people who are made out of the same stuff as Neil Armstrong. But there was something about that man's character. I mean, he and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon at exactly the same time, right? I mean, they landed on the moon simultaneously. And the way that Neil acted after the moon landing and the way that Buzz acted after the moon landing is virtually opposite each other. They're very close to being directly opposite reactions. Neil became extremely private, very, very private, very secluded, taught engineering I want to say at Purdue, I think. And Buzz got into some real trouble with drinking and stuff. And, you know, and I know the show meanders because that's why we do the show, is for the meandering. But the thing about Buzz that I've heard anecdotally, Buzz is not a nice guy. Buzz is not the kind of guy where I know people who've known him. I've never met him. I actually shook his hand once, but I've never met him. But Buzz is not a nice guy. Neither was Chuck Yeager, by the way. And they were the same kind of not nice guys. But I have heard anecdotally that Aldrin, when he came back from the moon, he heard essentially his father said to Buzz, second, you couldn't have been first. You know, what do you say about that? And I remember hearing about Buzz having problems when I was very young, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old. And somebody explained to me, this was right when it was just, you know, 1973, 74, so 4 or 5 years after the moon landing. And when I said that I heard that Buzz was having problems, and I said, why? You know, I mean, the guy's one of the most famous guys in the world. He's accomplished this unbelievable thing. And my friend at the planetarium said, Bill, imagine what your life would be like if you're 30 years old and you've walked on the moon. And this was all you ever wanted to do in your life, but you've done it. You've walked on the moon. Where do you go from there? What do you do with the rest of your life? You've got another 60 years ahead of you. What's going to compare to that? And even as a young person, I realized, that's actually a pretty heavy burden to bear. It's kind of like being the football hero in your high school who scores, the winning touchdown in the last second of the state championship and has to go through the curse of living a life where the high point of his life was 17 and downhill ever since then. So, the purpose of heroes is they make you. There is a built-in human, almost an instinct. It's not an instinct because an instinct is a set of behaviors, but it's a very strong, built-in human survival technique to revere leaders. And this can be good and it can be bad. When you force people to revere leaders and you indoctrinate them, like with Stalin or Hitler or Mao or now Kim, you can use that mechanism in people to turn them into, death bots. So when people say some people are my hero, I am left with well, first of all, an enormous sense of humility and gratitude. But I'm also left with the sense that what I said originally is may sound funny and may sound like false humility, but is actually true. If I'm somebody's hero, then we are having a pretty significant hero crisis in this country. I'm very proud of the work I do, and I'm very fond of it, and I'm extremely grateful for the people that allow me to do it. And I have always been good at and always enjoyed teaching people things, explaining things to people. If it turns out that the landscape out there is so barren that this is a source of real, genuine hero inspiration, then I'm deeply honored, deeply grateful, and wondering why there's not an awful lot more of it around, because you are not looking at Audie Murphy here, or Neil Armstrong for that matter, or Thomas Sowell or anybody like that, just pretty much a regular guy who got tired of hearing all of these slanders and lies and just started to think seriously about things I hadn't really thought about before. But in any event, again, I'm very grateful, and it's very flattering. And I will say one more thing. It is unbelievable, and that's a word bandied around by everybody. Me certainly as much as often rather as anybody else. Unbelievable. It's amazing. It was unbelievable, but it's unbelievable to me. Natasha and I went out to Santa Barbara to celebrate having met 1 year before. And as we were leaving the office, somebody in the elevator in the office who I didn't know, as she was getting off the elevator, said, "Keep it up, Bill, you do really good work." And it was unbelievable to me. And likewise, when we stopped on the way at Chick-fil-A, go Chick-fil-A, somebody else said, "Are you Bill Whittle?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I get a picture?" I said, "Absolutely." And I never get over it. I never get over it. I don't want to get over it. It's astonishing to me. It really, truly is. It's astonishing. When people will say, it's Bill, the famous Bill Whittle or this and that, it really is astonishing to me. People that have met me know I'm enormously more unpleasant and taller than I am on television. But I've spent some time with Matt Lloyd online, and I've spent some time online and face-to-face with Foghorn there at Viper Check. And so when Foghorn basically said, "Come on down to Tampa and we'll put you in a room full of other fighter pilots, we'll give you a call sign," they were my heroes. Those guys were my actual heroes. And I felt that kind of reverence, which is why the second that I realized that this was not going to be a two-way street of banter, I simply just shut up and did everything I possibly could in order to salvage what was left of my meager reputation and try to earn some fragment of respect of people who I wanted to be. I wanted to be these guys my whole life, and they're out there actually doing it. And as I said before that ceremony, we did some flying. We did formation flying in turbulent weather under very cloudy thunderstorm skies, and I'm just up there in the front seat of a I want to say it was a Legacy the first time, Lancer Legacy, and I look off to the right. Oh, look, there's an RV, and it's this far away from our wingtip, and bumpy air and the perfect formation. Foghorn was teaching Matt and I how to fly formation. I already knew how to fly formation, but we have to humor Foghorn on account of how he's not in the Air Force anymore and he doesn't have anybody to boss around. No, but he's giving us instruction in real time over the internet, and this is this is mother's milk to me. This is it's like I can't get enough of it. I love it, absolutely love it, and that's going to be one of the things that going to make our Star Citizen venture interesting, if nothing else, and that is that we are going to be able to train people in the game by people who do this in the real world professionally. I think that's a neat thing. Talk about absence of teachers and heroes and stuff like that. I think it'd be great to have actual fighter pilots teaching some young game players formation flying. And the reason I think, and this is the reason why I'm so psyched about the Star Citizen thing. Let's say we find, and this goes directly to your question, indirectly. Let's say that we find 5 teenagers or people in their early 20s, probably going to be all boys, and they decide that they want to, sign up and learn formation flying. How is that politically interesting? What does that do? Well, in a very simple sense, in a very basic sense, it is discipline. It's discipline. Teamwork has been shoved down their throats their entire lives, these millennials. And in fact, it's been so shoved down their throats that most of them don't know how to act on their own. They don't. It's not that they lack initiative; it's that they don't know what initiative is. But if you're going to do something like this and you're going to take it seriously, then you basically have to. You have to subsume your ego. And this was a point I made on my Right Angle, which has not come out yet. It'll come out in a day or two or so. I was talking about this college in Georgia, University of Georgia, home of the filthy effing Bulldogs. And one of the professors at the school has decided that he's going to give out grades, but if students find the grade to be too stressful, then they will be able to change the grade to whatever grade they see fit with his full approval. And that led into some interesting discussions. And here's what I think is interesting about the discussions, basically just parroting what I said on Right Angle, but at least I get to parrot myself. His attitude and the attitude of all of the progressives out there and all the people who are doing the teaching these days is essentially this. You must be gentle. And by the way, because he said, oh, and furthermore, in our class, there will be no more negative comments of any kind in the class. If your work, for whatever reason, is unsatisfactory, or if there's something missing, I will email you in private, but I will not say anything negative about anybody in the class. And this professor believes, as the rest of the left believes, that by doing this, you are preserving this individual's self-esteem because you are not denigrating them in front of the class. You're not embarrassing them and humiliating them in front of the class. Therefore, they're going to have self-esteem, and therefore they're all going to be friends. But we find that that's not true at all. The reason there's such rabid social justice warriors is because they have no self-esteem. I'm going to do a firewall on this subject. Or did a survey just recently that found out that aggressive virtue signaling is in fact a result of people having very, very little moral sense of their own, and they feel like they have to pump up something, so they pump up this, outrage about, Palestinian, whatever the case may be. So their theory is wrong, but the question then is, how can we prove that? Well, thinking in real time, I thought I disagree with this professor's model of humans. The professor who said that we're going to let students pick their own grade in order to preserve their self-esteem and help them become better people. I disagree with his premise. So what can I offer in evidence to support a different viewpoint? And what I came up with was SEAL training, SEAL team training, BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition School. If you've ever watched SEALs in training, if you've ever seen a movie about Marine drill instructors, if you've ever been in the military at all, you will probably perceive by this point that a drill instructor is not particularly shy about humiliating an individual in front of a group. And I was thinking this through as I was saying it. He is signaling out individuals for their failures, and he's not just pointing them out. He is shouting them at the top of his lungs and making the individual who's committed the infraction feel as small as possible. So why is it that if this humiliation is so bad for people, why is it that modern progressive students coming out of these kind of colleges where you get to pick your own grade are such helpless infants? And the people who come out of SEAL training are in fact the most capable, happy, confident, kind people that I've ever met. Why is it that humiliating somebody actually produces better people? What is it? I know it's true. I can see the outcome, but I didn't understand the mechanism. And it occurred to me that what happens in a case like that is let's say somebody's being slow on a run, and this person is lagging behind, and this person is causing the entire company or platoon or whatever to slow down. And the drill instructor is running next to this guy and shouting at the top of his lungs. What's going on here? Well, there's a bunch of things going on here. The first thing that's going on here, believe it or not, is the fact that a young man in his 20s is being yelled at by a man in his 30s or maybe even 40s for not being able to keep up with him. What he's basically saying is, without saying a word, the drill instructor is saying, as a result of the work that I do in the training and being a Marine, let's just say Marines just for the sake of it, okay, because it's true for all branches, SEALs, Marines, whatever. When a drill instructor is basically running next to a guy who can't keep up and giving him living hell for being so slow and so lazy and so fat or so out of shape or whatever, the very first message that's being telegraphed is, this man is twice your age and he's able to run you into the ground. He's able to run you into the ground because he has trained to do it. And so there's kind of a sense of hope here, right? Well, this guy's twice my age, sometimes maybe 3 times my age, and he's able to run this course. So he's doing something I'm not doing. But the second thing that's going on is twofold, and one of them is obvious and the other one isn't. The obvious one is he's essentially trying to tear down that individual's identity, trying to tear down his individual ego so that he can then become part of a group in a way that you can't become part of a group if you maintain your individual ego. Returning to the story of my great day getting my call sign. That was the only experience I ever had with being in the military, by the way, those 2 hours, the only time I've ever been in the military. What I had thought, as I've said many times, I thought that going into this was that there's going to be a lot of, sarcasm and a lot of criticism and a lot of snark directed at me, and being fairly quick on my feet, I'd direct some snark back. And what I realized instantly was when they started saying, what is it doing here? Why did you bring it to us? I realized that this is not a two-way street. And the first thing it did, this humiliation, personal humiliation, the first thing it did was it got me out of that arrogant, smug position of, this is a kind of a thing between equals. They're fighter pilots and I'm an internet star and we'll go down there and we'll have a little back and forth and it'll be kind of fun. No, you don't have to be here, Bill. You can drive and go away. No one's forcing you to be here. But if you're going to be here, we're going to make it pretty clear about who's in charge here and who doesn't even merit a name, who's not even a person. I don't even get a pronoun. I'm the indefinite article. I'm an it. I have to work hard enough and prove myself to these people before I can even become a he, before I can even become a person, let alone a fighter pilot, let alone a squadron mate. So all of that had to be broken down. And because I was primed for this, the process of breaking it down for me took about 3 seconds, maybe something like that. But it has to happen. And that's the obvious thing. So the individual has to be kind of subordinated to the group for the group to be able to function on a level, but something else is happening. And what else is happening is what's happening to the other people in the other recruits in the training platoon, let's say. So somebody's running slow and they're being chewed out and everybody else is looking at this person, and the professor at Georgia will tell you that the person who's running slowly and being chewed out is being laughed at and mocked by the people who are not running slowly. But that's not the case at all. Certainly not the case as I would understand it and as I've heard it told. On the contrary, when somebody is being chewed out for being the slowest person in the run, most people's reaction is, thank God, because it likely would have been me. I'm probably the second slowest person in the run. No one ever, I've never seen or anecdotally heard a case where somebody was laughing at somebody who was being chewed out for something, especially if it's a first-time mistake. They're not strong enough, they're not this enough. I've never heard of, and certainly not when you get to the level of buds, have I heard of anybody say, oh, that guy's a weakling, no. The reaction to this is, I'm glad it's not me. It could be me, and I'd better stay on my toes. And what that does is it puts people into a situation of sympathy with other people's weakness, and it's been my perception that drill instructors, and I never thought about this until 5 days ago, but drill instructors are not stingy when it comes to handing out abuse to people. And it never occurred to me until recently that they have to hand it out to everybody, that everybody has to be balled out. On some level, it has to happen, because everybody has to feel sympathy for everybody else. Everybody has to feel sympathy for the other person and put themselves in the other person's place and essentially say, hey, there but for the grace of God go I, getting this reaming because, I've done this before, I've stumbled here or whatever. And it puts everybody in a situation of sympathy and humility, and it bonds them together rather than splits them apart, as this self-esteem movement would tell you. And as I said on the show, and when I said this, Scott Ott, who can reliably be counted on to tear up at anything really remotely sentimental. And I said, my favorite thing about this dynamic is, especially when you're dealing with officers, buds, for example, my favorite thing about this is that when the class graduates, in the case of Officer Candidate School or something like that, when the class graduates, the drill instructor has to salute the people who he has been basically demeaning and humiliating for the last several months. He has to salute them. They've gotten through the course. They're now officers or whatever the case may be, and they outrank him. And that is a beautiful thing. But even if they don't have to salute the sergeant, because it's usually a sergeant, almost always a sergeant, even if the sergeant doesn't have to salute the recruits, when the recruits pass, those that don't wash out, when the recruits pass, the demeanor of that drill instructor not only changes, it inverts. And what used to be a person who was impossible to please, who you spend every waking hour just trying to predict how to make this guy happy, only to avoid the punishment, not because you had any affection for the guy. All of a sudden, this person who's never really shown you any respect, as a matter of fact, pointed out every weakness that you've ever had, all of a sudden, this person shakes your hand and looks you in the eye and says, congratulations, and essentially says, welcome to the club. And that's the transformational moment. That's the transformational moment. It certainly was for me, because I went in with this ego, and that ego and arrogance was beaten out of me very early in the evening. And I spent the rest of the evening trying to earn the respect and the gratitude, the respect, not gratitude, just trying to earn the fundamental respect of these guys. And I was 100% sure I wasn't going to get it, 100% sure that I just made a complete and total ass out of myself, and that it was a gigantic humiliation for me. And so when they finally inked me up with the name on that T-shirt, and all of these guys who had been doing a very efficient job of making me feel like zero for the last 2 hours, lower than zero, when all of a sudden these guys start shaking your hand and patting you on the back and saying you did a good job, even not only for a civilian, you did a good job for an Air Force recruit, and they start calling you brother and things, it's transformational. It rewires your soul. It burns out a lot of impurities. It does something grand, because even though the 2 hours was a very small trial in terms of the bigness of things, I had, to some degree, I'd not earned the uniform, because I don't have to put my life at risk, and they do. But I had earned, I think, the respect because I had spent so much time in it, and I had put so much effort into the same thing as them. And I'll just close this story by saying what I've said every time I tell this story. When we got there a little late. There were so many thunderstorms at Tampa that the ramp was shut down. I had to sit in the airplane for 45 minutes. It was starting to get dark. And after I went to the Foghorn picked me up, and after we went to the liquor store to buy my nearly $500 worth of bribes for these people so they don't end up with Bambi or gay porn or something as a call sign, we get to the airport, and these guys are very taciturn, and they're not like show business people. Oh, hi! No, not at all. They said, yeah, I thought maybe we just take the planes out and fly around the flagpole a little bit, just show you the airport and surrounding airspace. And I had this moment in my head. I've told the story 100 times. If you've heard it before, you just have to hear it again. It was one of those moments where something breaks through your consciousness with such clarity. It is like they said in Apocalypse Now, it's like I got shot between the eyes with a diamond bullet. And here was the experience. I'm watching these guys pulling out these little airplanes. I grew up in Florida. I haven't been there for many years, but I grew up in Florida, so I know what a Florida thunderstorm is looking like. And I looked out along the line of these hangars, and I saw a big thunderstorm moving in. And I saw these Air Force pilots looking at that and thinking, it doesn't look too bad. And then somebody said, it's that one, the one that we're worried about. And I take 2 steps back and I look 90 degrees to the right, and there's an even bigger thunderstorm, even closer coming in. And these were the thoughts that I had like a diamond bullet, just like this, just exactly like this, verbatim, with this emotional response. Believe me, don't believe me, I don't care. I thought, I don't want to fly in this weather. I don't think it's safe to fly in this weather. That was my first thought. And following it on its heels instantly was the thought that, but I'd rather be killed in an airplane crash than tell these guys that I'm not going to fly in this weather. I would much rather be killed in an airplane crash than say, I don't know, it just seems a little iffy. Don't you think the clouds are a bit iffy? Don't you think maybe because, look, these people are professional combat pilots. This was the third thought that entered my head. These people are professional combat pilots, and they fly their airplanes here pretty much every day in this weather. And if they think it's safe to fly, that's good enough for me. And there was a time when we were coming out of a loop, because the airspace is limited to about 1,800 feet, I want to say, and you go any higher, you're in Tampa International's airspace. And so we're playing tag up there, and I'm flying with this guy, and he goes up high after a guy, and he flips over, inverts, does a split S out, and as we're upside down and we're coming out of a dive, and there was a period there that felt like a second or two. I bet it was 1/10 of a second. There was, as I'm looking at the water coming up like this, there was a moment when I said, I don't think we're going to get out of this loop. I don't think we're going to get out of it. And I was perfectly fine with that. I really, truly was. I was perfectly fine with that. I thought, well, that's, if you're going to go, that's how I'd like to go. So the self-esteem movement is the greatest catastrophe to befall America since Marx was born. It has got everything exactly backwards, and it is the product of people who are raised as cowards. And I don't mean that in a malicious way. I mean it in a very precise clinical way. It's the philosophy of cowards and losers imposed upon other people. And I don't believe that there are such things as inherent cowards or losers. I believe that since cowards and losers came up with this philosophy, they're turning the entire generation of Americans into cowards and losers. And if they'd had different instruction, then they would have turned them all into heroes and winners. And I really believe that. I'm sure there's some bad eggs in there that wouldn't have made it, and in the same way that there are some good eggs that managed to escape the self-esteem movement, but it's been a catastrophe. And if you think it's bad now, just remember we're looking at the very beginning of a very big and wide bell curve, and it's going to get a lot worse. Hooray. Let's do maybe one or two more, no more than two. So what's Steve Darrell? 5, 6, 1, 4. See if there's any big gems there. Hey, there's Dave Olson. We haven't heard from him for a while. I think since last time when he told me this is my 5th attempt at the question, which usually works for me. So Dave's got 8 upticks, and Dave says, so the Article 5 convention movement is picking up steam. That's where the states call a convention to amend the Constitution instead of fooling around with the Congress. Term limits and a balanced budget amendment seem to be the hot items, to which I would add the line item veto. Do you approve these? If not, why not? What would you add as a potential amendment, and how would you prefer to see these amendments written and enacted? I am still not convinced that the Constitutional Convention idea will not be gamed by the left. I'm deeply concerned about that. These people live for politics. It's what they do. And I am very concerned that what you are essentially doing is you are unlocking the Constitution. That's exactly what you're doing. If you call it, the Constitution can be amended by the traditional process of having an amendment pass the Congress and then be ratified by, was it 2/3 or 3/4 of the states? I forget. But that's a high hurdle to clear, and it should be a high hurdle. I am very concerned that if you unlock the Constitution with a bunch of people in a room, you could do unlimited damage to the Constitution. Now, with that said, an incredible amount of damage has already been done to the Constitution. So, assuming that you could get this thing to play by the rules, here's what I would do. I would pass an amendment that repealed the 16th, 17th, and 18th Amendment. I don't want to get one wrong. I would repeal the income tax, the 16th, I think. I'd repeal the 17th in a heartbeat and restore the power of the Senate and give it to the states. And I guess the 18th Amendment was prohibition, so it's already been repealed. So I'd repeal 16 and 17. That would be the one amendment. They are hereby repealed. Bam. So there'd be no justification for the income tax. There'd be no justification for an arbitrary line that divides people into rich and poor, good and bad, and so on. That would just go away. Repealing the 17th Amendment would mean that the states would appoint people to the Senate who are not interested in what's good for the people of the state. They're interested in what's good for the state. The representatives of the people are in a house called the House of Representatives. That's called the People's House because it represents the people. When the people elect senators rather than the states selecting senators, the Senate becomes a House of Lords. It's lost its purpose. There's no reason for it. And all it does is just basically encourage cronyism and this professional political class. So I would restore the power of the Senate as the House of the states. I'm in agreement of a balanced budget amendment. I would probably be in agreement of a term limitation amendment, although my amendment would say no reelection. I know everybody used to say, oh, what? I would just say no reelection to the same office. But a person upon being elected to federal office in the House of in Congress, governorship, or the presidency, or state legislatures, once elected, that person is no longer eligible for the same seat, ever. Well, what about the time it takes to gain experience? You're not supposed to be gaining experience from Washington. You're supposed to be sending experience to Washington. That's the idea. So people say, well, if you have no if you have no reelection, then by the time people are just finally figuring out how it works, then they have to go home. Precisely correct, yes. Because we have gotten to a place where Washington tells the representatives how things are done and not the way it's supposed to be, which is the representatives tell Washington how it's supposed to be done. So I would make a term limitation amendment, and I would say no reelection, which means no PACs, no political influence, no influence buying, no lobbying, wouldn't matter. We're not putting away a big money for a war chest. I wouldn't have to spend my second year of my 2-year term trying to raise money for my third term and so on. I would just get rid of it. If you're an extraordinary politician and you start as a representative, then God bless you, run for Senate. And if you do a great job in your 6 years as Senate, then run for governor. And if you do a great job with your 4 years as governor, then run for president and do great 4 years as president. The second term of a president has never produced anything. The second term is just coasting, and it's terrible. That includes Ronald Reagan and people I admire. So that would be my amendment. I would do something to clarify the fact that the Supreme Court does not outrank the Constitution. And I would do something to say that the power granted to the Supreme Court to rule laws unconstitutional is in the Constitution. And so when they say something like Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the states, foreign powers, and Indian tribes, I would make sure that that meant it was limited to states, foreign powers, and Indian tribes, and leave us the hell alone. Because if they wanted it to be what the progressives wanted it to be, it would say Congress shall have the power to regulate terms among the commerce among the people. And it doesn't say that. So the reason that the Commerce Clause is used to do everything, including justify Obamacare and forcing Americans to buy things that they don't want to buy. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the states, and people live in states. There we go. This kind of chicanery, this kind of low-level sophistry, only works because people are utterly ignorant of the document. And I had heard the Commerce Clause excuse for my entire life and never paid much attention to it because I didn't pay much for politics. But when I started getting into it, I heard about the Commerce Clause. I said, oh, maybe the Commerce Clause does kind of, allow this kind of thing. And then, I did then what I did. I read the Commerce Clause, and I was astonished. I was flabbergasted at how clear and simple it is. And there's no argument about it. The Supreme Court says the Supreme Court's wrong. And I know they're wrong because I can read the sentence. It's in English and it's very simple and it says what it says. And we've identified these three parties throughout the whole Constitution: federal government, the United States, the states, and the people. And This is what it says. This is the law. And the Supreme Court is wrong because this document is what gives the Supreme Court power in the first place. There you go. So that's what I would do in a convention of the states. And I'd get up there and I'd start, I'd get on my soapbox and start pounding the good book and see if I could convince people. Let's do one more here. I'll see if I can find somebody who we don't hear from too often. Hey, here's one. I haven't read the question, but I like the start. Eric Blake says, "Hey, Bill, I'm a relative newcomer to the lounge, but I've been a major fan for a long time." Thank you very much. "I'm the guy who sent you and Klavan the question about the politics of film noir. That was a great question on that show. I had some really brilliant, insightful, and very witty things to say about that, and Klavan basically nodded when I was talking. Anyway, my question is, some time ago you noted that anti-heroes like Clint Eastwood's Western characters were more interesting than marble monument types a la John Wayne. But more recently on NRA TV, you've mentioned the surge of on-screen anti-heroes as an example of problems in our current pop culture. So has your view of the value of anti-heroes changed as a whole, and if so, how?" It's a great question. Nice way to wrap up an evening show about talking largely about heroes. What I did not realize when I was condemning, well, let's take Clint Eastwood as a specific example. Let's take the Clint Eastwood characters. He's got a name. Somebody will tell me. Even though he's never named, it's the drifter or the man with no name, whatever. But essentially, throughout the spaghetti westerns, Clint played the same basic character. He's got a little thin cigar in his mouth, and he's got his hat, and he squints, and it's the same guy in Fistful of Dollars and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and all the rest of it. Now, this guy is certainly not a hero. He's not a hero in the in the John Wayne version of the hero. So I had said that he's kind of an anti-hero. But that's not exactly true. And the reason I realized that that was a mistake is because if you think about it, nothing that I'm aware of that character did is destructive to the ideals that make America great. I think that's really it. In other words, he can be the kind of guy who would, break a bunch of laws, maybe gun down somebody. I don't remember seeing him gun down somebody in cold blood because then he would be an anti-hero. But he was a non-heroic person who ended up being kind of the hero. And I wasn't able to see that. What he did not do was he didn't tear down America. He didn't tear down the government. He didn't do any of these things. As a matter of fact, let's go to the other anti-hero that Clint played so well. And I had a good chance to hear this from his own mouth. In a small group of people. It was another transformational moment for me. Let's talk about Dirty Harry. So Dirty Harry, is Dirty Harry an anti-hero? I might have said that he was a while ago, but he's clearly not. And once I heard Clint talk about Dirty Harry, I realized, well, actually, of course he's not an anti-hero. He is a hero. He's just an unheroic hero. He's not a marble monument hero. But when the man with no name, yeah, there you go. So what do I mean by that, and what did Clint mean by that? Well, Clint said when he made the first Dirty Harry movie, he was watching the news over the course of months or years, and he was so disgusted by the court system using technicalities to get murderers off. This was the beginning, I want to say the beginning of the 70s, when this thing was starting to pick up steam. You misspelled his name on the search warrant, therefore the case is thrown out, therefore the murderer walks the streets and kills again. That's pretty much the kind of thing we're talking about. And Clint said he wanted to do a movie for the victims. He wanted to do a movie for the victims of crime. And since the system was no longer administering justice, he had to create a character who was at war with the system, which would make him an anti-hero, except it's the system that's corrupt. So he is, in fact, at war with a corrupt, unjust system, and he is, as a matter of fact, Dirty Harry is a fighter for justice. Now, Dirty Harry is not, as I said, a model monument kind of guy. He'll blow a guy's head clean off. But he won't blow an innocent person's head clean off. Dirty Harry understands who he's dealing with, and he doesn't need to be told what to look for. He knows criminals and murderers when he sees them. And he is administering the justice that is missing in society. So he is a hero. He's just not a heroic hero. He's in the traditional sense. He's not self-sacrificing, and he's not the guy in the white hat, and he doesn't insist on taking this person prisoner because that's the way we fight. He's not that guy at all. He's not a we can be better than this kind of guy. He's not a we should aspire to be like him kind of guy. He's not he's not the kind of guy you want to hold up as a role model for your kids. He's kind of a psychopath, Dirty Harry. But he's a psychopath for justice, and he's on the side of justice and not on the side of the law. And that's a very important distinction, because the only reason that Dirty Harry exists is because justice and the law had diverged so much as a result of the progressives that you could no longer do both at the same time. You could no longer be a member of the system, the police force, and still see justice done. The rules of the game had changed so much and gotten so far away from justice that you had to make a decision, and the decision is, do you want to be law-abiding? Do you want to follow the policies and, sort of play by the book kind of thing? Or are you going to rebel against and essentially become a traitor to the police principles because you see that these principles have changed to the degree now where they're not only not administering justice, they're preventing justice. Was it Brewdaddy 111? No, who said that? Tiki Rocket, it's a great name, said Dirty Harry. No, that's not it either, about the tension between law and justice. This is the point I was just making. What was the line? Who was it? I just want to see who said something. It was like really good. Ohio Castle said Dirty Harry is a knight errant, a Ronin. That's exactly what he is. He's a knight. He's a knight errant. He is which meant a knight who is on a mission. If you tell, Galahad to find the Holy Grail, what you're basically doing is you're writing a hall pass for Galahad. He doesn't have to come to the court anymore. He's a knight errant. He's on an errand now, and he is basically going to do what he has to do until he accomplishes his mission or dies trying. So, yeah. So this is a really fun show, actually, talking about all these things. It's nice when, just by sheer randomness, things kind of tidy up and end that way. And what are we looking at here? Oh, my God, my vision is getting so bad, but this is black type on dark, but it looks like an hour 18. I'd rather do a good hour, 20 minutes, than a lousy 3 hours, so I'm going to have to call it a day here. Get a couple emails on fire off, and then I'm going to go home because I have a home now, and I have somebody waiting for me, and I sit out on the porch and eat dinner, and it's just absolutely lovely. All right, well, that'll do it, I guess, for episode 161 of the Stratosphere Lounge, brought to you, as always, by the paying members of BillWhittle.com, who are, in fact, responsible for this this camera and the lights and the electricity and all the rest. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's going to be a fun week. Once again, if you wrote about Star Citizen, I swear I will get back to you. We got all of them collated. I have just not known what to say because I've still been trying to get these things worked out. But in any event, that'll happen shortly, and we'll have some more fun stuff to show you. And even if you think it's a dumb idea, at least I'm having more fun than I've had in 10 years. So there you go. All right, that'll do it for the show. Again, thanks for joining us. Everybody be careful out there. You guys, don't take any wooden nickels. And we expect that we will see you next Wednesday. Bye-bye now.